Life is, among other things, a continual series of choices between saving and consumption. Do I save this dollar to help support me in my old age, or do I spend it today on beer and pretzels? Well, during the past half century, people saved less and bought a lot more beer and pretzels and vacations, swimming pools, and so on, because they believed the Republican Party's and Democratic Party's promises that Social Security and Medicare would be there for them in their old age. They were not told the truth, that there simply are not enough young people to support the old. So now, tens of millions of baby boomers are about to retire, on top of the tens of millions of people who are already retired, and they do not have enough savings to take care of themselves. They were lied to, so they used too much of their money for beer and pretzels and not enough for savings. To try to keep Social Security and Medicare and the hundreds of other boondoggles alive as long as possible, government officials plan to raise taxes, but they are also already printing dollars like a counterfeiter. Today we will talk about the effect of that on you by answering questions from people who subscribe to my investment newsletter, Early Warning Report. Well, I'm happy to have Bryce back with me. He's my assistant, and he will be reading the questions from the subscribers and probably following up with some of his own questions. So Bryce, what's the first question?
Well, the first question is in regards to just the general destruction of the dollar. It's from reader BR, and he says, Dear Rick, why did the chicken cross the road?
I think he's referring to the fact that the government promised the chicken that it would protect him against the cars that were coming.
Yeah, on to more serious questions. You constantly hear the mainstream media, well, not constantly, but you hear the mainstream media talking about how the size of the debt, the size of our unfunded liabilities, the printing of dollars. But how big is it really?
Well, the honest answer to that is nobody knows. All we have is the government's own statistics on that. Now, I should point out there have been some recent figures publicized by government officials that are absolutely chilling. Now, generally, you look at something like that and you say, well, you know, governments are not famous for telling the truth. So, you know, is this really an understatement or not? But we'll just take those statistics as they are, because some government officials do tell the truth. And incidentally, these people have families, and they are beginning to realize that this whole thing has put their families in jeopardy. And that could be why some of them are starting to blow the whistle on this whole thing. So anyhow, there have been some recent studies released, and a very good place to get a summary of them is an article that was in Forbes magazine on May 15th, 2009. It's titled The 81% Tax Increase. This is an excellent breakdown of the statistics and what they really mean, and I'll go over a little bit of that right now. Come to think of it, before we get into that, a better way to start it probably is to say that in all probability the total unfunded liabilities that the government has to cover are well over $100 trillion. That's again by the government's own statistics, $100 trillion.
And now that's stuff that we've bought, as it were, we haven't even paid for yet.
Well, they haven't not bought, but the commitments that have been made, to take money from you and give it to other people. Now, to give you an idea of what $100 trillion means, $1,000 tightly stacked is about 4 inches high, which is about that. Okay, $1 million tightly stacked is about 333 feet high, which is about the length of a football field, or maybe a 33-story building. That's $1 million. The $1 trillion, $1 trillion, just $1 trillion tightly stacked is 63,000 miles high. The 100 trillion that the government has committed to take from Peter and give to Paul is the distance from tightly stacked, 100 trillion tightly stacked, the distance from the Earth to the Moon 25 times. Now I'll give you, using the government's own statistics again in this article, I'll give you another way of trying to get your hands around it. Think about all of the wealth in the United States owned by everybody who's not a government. I'm talking about all the wealth owned by the poor, the middle class, the rich, big corporations, churches, charities, anybody who's not the government, all the wealth owned by them. And I'm talking about not money, not just the money, but automobiles, boats, planes, land, houses, office buildings, factories, loaves of bread, hula hoops, lamps, desks, all of the wealth, all of it in the United States. Now try to get your arms around what that means. Well, the government has promised to confiscate and redistribute twice as much wealth as exists. So that's the size of the problem. Wow. And so, I mean, obviously there's no possible way they can meet these commitments, and so they are grasping at straws. One thing they're doing is planning to raise taxes a lot, and another thing they're doing is just printing money like a counterfeiter.
And this isn't just something that's happened to America.
No.
This has happened many times before.
Right. This is old stuff. Governments get themselves into this situation over and over again all through history. They make promises that they can't possibly keep, and then one way they try to keep things going for as long as they can is by printing money. Right,
and it's one thing to just start redistributing wealth, and it's another thing to start counterfeiting it. Well, it's not creating wealth, it's taxing.
Yeah.
Inflation is taxes.
Right.
Taxation.
Now, it's a very important point to cover there. The reason, ask yourself, well, why is counterfeiting illegal? Why is only the government allowed to print money? Why does it throw people in prison who counterfeit their money? And the answer is that money responds to the law of supply and demand just like everything else does. When the supply of dollars goes up, the value of each individual dollar goes down, and then prices rise to compensate for that. And that's what inflation is. Inflation means inflating the money supply. That causes the value of the individual dollar to go down, and then prices rise to compensate for that. And as governments print more and more money, the value of the money goes down, prices rise, and you eventually get to the point where nobody wants the money anymore. They don't trust it to keep its value. And then they start trying to get rid of it as quickly as possible, and eventually it becomes worthless. And that brings us to a chart that I printed out here recently. This is the monetary base chart. And the statistics are from the St. Louis Federal Reserve. The chart shows very clearly that the monetary base, which is the raw material from which the government makes the money in the banking system. They don't really run it off on presses so much anymore. They use the banking system in a very convoluted way so that people don't understand. But essentially the monetary base is the banking raw material that they use to create the money supply. And what it shows running from 1918, that's the end of World War I, to today, you'll see today here recently the line has gone vertical, which means they are really trying to expand the money supply at an incredible rate.